is that really you can live a happy, full, rich, healthy life, even with a diagnosis of diabetes, and that your diabetes can improve. And so I wanted to let you know the good part of this. I'm going to talk about some of the not so fun aspects of diabetes first. And then we'll get into the things that you can do to make your wellness and your health improve, even with a diagnosis like diabetes or prediabetes or even metabolic syndrome, which we'll talk about. Okay, so my name is Abby Horton. I am a registered nurse. I teach here at the University of Alabama in the Capstone College of Nursing as an assistant professor. I'm a certified health and life coach, and I'm a former Wellbama ambassador and one of your wellness class educators. If you'd like to reach me, my email is abby.horton@ua.edu. And I will be happy to answer any questions, give feedback, connect you to resources, whatever is most helpful for you. So my disclaimer is that this is just for educational purposes only. So this does not constitute medical advice, and that we would ask you to please contact your healthcare provider, specifically the person that helps you manage your diabetes or prediabetes, for specific medical care needs. Now, I will be happy to answer general questions at the end, and so feel free to ask. I may not be able to answer, but always feel free to ask. Focus on what you can control, forget the rest. Take what resonates with you, and what doesn't, just leave it behind. Maybe it wasn't for you. Maybe it's for your neighbor or someone else on the call. Baby steps, small progress is still progress. So doing 1% better today is what we're aiming for, right? Not perfection. And then please do reach out if you have any questions or concerns. So the first part of this presentation is kind of talking about the impact of diabetes. And there's lots of numbers here. And really the reason that I like for you to see this is to know that you're not alone. I think for so many people, there's this stigma around diabetes. And I'm speaking for someone that for many years was pre-diabetic, and my husband does have type 2 diabetes. And so I'm speaking from that experience more so than my experience as a nurse or as a nurse educator or as a health and life coach. And so when I talk about diabetes, know that it's very personal for me. It's not just teaching from a textbook. And so, anyway, I want y'all to have that frame of reference because I live with diabetes every day in the form of my husband. So, in the US alone, 1 in 3 Americans is either diabetic or they're pre-diabetic. And many people who are pre-diabetic don't even know that they are. They don't know that their numbers are within the range that would be considered diabetic. And so I think that's really important to understand that. Of course, we know there's a lot of medical cost overall, but we feel those costs. If you have diabetes, you know that it does not just impact, the medications that you buy and the supplies that you have to purchase, but it also impacts just how you can live your life with making choices about what you're going to eat for the day. The healthier choice might be a little bit more expensive, especially if you're out on the go. So there are kind of those hidden costs that you don't think about. And the $242 billion with a B in medical treatments, that's just kind of scratching the surface. So we're going to talk about what we can do about it. I want y'all to have these slides just for the information, but I want you to understand too that Alabama has one of the highest rates of diabetes. And so there is something about geography, about lifestyle, about culture that really plays a factor in a lot of the chronic illnesses like diabetes that we see. And so, Alabama, when you look at chronic illness overall, we're usually ranked as one of the last states when it comes to overall health. We're usually 49th or 50th. We go back and forth between a handful of southern states. And I think a lot of it's because we have a lot of fried foods. Our weather is such that we don't often get out. We are more rural, and so we don't have as many opportunities to be able to walk to and from places. We have to do a lot of driving. There are so many components that could be kind of a presentation all by itself of the challenges and the barriers that we have because we are in a more rural southern state. But the reason I call your attention to this is because we have a lot of challenges in Alabama, and diabetes is always one of the top ones listed because we do tend to be more overweight. And so when I talk about being overweight, I am no longer overweight, but I spent most of my adult life in type 3 morbid obesity. So there's different levels of obesity and what we call morbidity based on that. And so I was in like the highest category of being obese for most of my adult life once I started having children. And so I say that to you today because when I hear someone talk about diabetes that has a stigma attached, or when I hear someone talk about being overweight or obese, and there's this stigma attached to that, right? Like as if you chose to be diabetic or as if you chose to be overweight. I want to be really clear that I've lived that. And so when I talk about it, it isn't from a place of judgment, it's a place of wanting to hear what I wish I could have heard when I started my health and wellness journey. And so I hope that that's really helpful to you. Don't know who's calling me, but let me ignore that. So sorry. No one ever calls unless you're on something important, right? So anyway, I hope that that helps you and inspires you a little bit. When I hear people talking about being grateful, my first thing that I think is, well, have you had a hard life? Because you make that sound so easy. Or when people talk about losing weight and they make it sound so easy as if you just choose broccoli instead of fried chicken. I'm like, well, have you been overweight? Do you know how hard it is? I'm eating a lot of broccoli and I'm still not losing weight. Part of my story was weight loss resistance, which is true for many people who have diabetes or other conditions that affect your inflammation and things. For example, like if you have polycystic ovarian syndrome, which I do, that goes hand in hand with metabolic syndrome and diabetes. That's true for many women. So you'll have what we call comorbidities, meaning that you have more than one chronic condition. Very, very true for most people. That's on theme for most patients and most adults in the US. And so, what do you do about that? We'll talk more about it. Some strategies to be able to implement. So more than 14% of the adults in Alabama do have the diagnosis of diabetes, but it's estimated that even beyond that, 37% of adults in Alabama have prediabetes. So you're looking at around, little much around 50% of our adults are having difficulty with that, which means that 50% of our adult population are probably struggling with weight loss resistance or being overweight or obese, which means they're probably also struggling with their cholesterol and their triglycerides, which means they're also probably struggling with their hypertension because all of those go hand in hand. And all of those things together make up metabolic syndrome. Okay. So metabolic syndrome is just kind of the umbrella term that you have for all of those different conditions. And you can see in this figure here, of course, this is pre-COVID. So we know that this has actually worsened over the years. That we're right up there with our neighbors. So again, Mississippi, we usually can count on them to be last place. My husband is actually from Mississippi, so I feel like I can say that. We're not going to just pick on our neighbors. We're actually, picking on our other half of the family. But, we go back and forth. And unfortunately, a lot of the times it's not that Alabama's numbers have improved, it's that Mississippi's numbers have actually worsened. And so I think that's a really important distinction to make. So diabetes is just really defined as increased sugar that is circulating in the blood, and it's also known as the medical term hyperglycemia. And so how is hyperglycemia measured? It's blood glucose levels that you get through either sticking your finger with like a small device and using a glucometer, or it's a venipuncture. So think about the phlebotomist at the hospitals or clinics that actually go into the vein and draw the blood. And so this will fluctuate depending on what you've had to eat or drink that day. And so you want to track your individual numbers and your trends per day, but you also want to really think about your overall numbers, how those are tracking. And so when we say, how are your numbers tracking, they're wanting to look at your HbA1c. And so that actually will look at, are you over the 90 to 120 days, are you actually having sustained high blood sugars? And if you are, that's considered the gold standard for diagnosing diabetes. Okay, so some risk factors for diabetes. You have, of course, obesity, especially if you carry your abdominal fat around your midsection. People who have adipose tissue or fat tissue that carry it around their midsection in their abdomen are more likely to have chronic illness and worsening health conditions because that fat or that layer of adipose tissue is actually surrounding the organs and putting pressure on those organs. For people who carry their weight and it's more in their face and their arms and their legs and their hips, that fat or adipose tissue is not having the same impact um, in terms of like structural impact on the body as that fat that's carried around the waist. Most people who have type 2 diabetes, research and numbers show they tend to carry that adipose tissue in their midsection, in their core. And so, again, that is partly just how your body is wired, right? That's DNA, that's genetics. So, if that is something that is a challenge for you, you need to kind of understand the increased risk factors and to try to address those as best you can. So, of course, for me, for my husband, we both do tend to carry our weight in our midsection. And so that does contribute to some of our challenges with insulin resistance. If you're over 45 years old, if you have a family history, if you have a history of high blood pressure, high cholesterol, gestational diabetes, if you're physically inactive or sedentary, so a lot of us are, right? For me, it's kind of feast or famine. Either I'm really busy and I'm on my feet all day, or I'm sitting at a desk a lot. So being physically inactive, history of heart disease or stroke, history of depression, and history of polycystic ovarian syndrome, which I mentioned. So normal blood sugar levels should usually typically be under 100 if you're fasting. So 70 to 99, the official recommendation from the American Dietetic Association, which not to be confused with the American Diabetes Association, is 80 to 130. And then 2 hours after meals, once you've eaten, it should be less than 140 for a person without diabetes, and then less than 180 for a person who does have a diagnosis of diabetes. And then the HbA1c, for a person without diabetes, you want it to be less than 5.7%. And for a person with diabetes, you want it to be 7% or less. And so those are good numbers to know. Those sometimes are hard numbers to come by, but you would like to kind of know those numbers to see where you're tracking, where those trends are. So if we have 87 million Americans who are diagnosed with prediabetes and some who are not, elevated blood glucose levels for them are not going to necessarily be high enough to have an official diagnosis, but they're out of the normal range. So they're probably going to be in that gap between the blue and the red numbers that we saw. And you can still have long-term health consequences and health damage with diabetes and prediabetes. And so you want to make sure that you understand healthy lifestyle habits that you can actually start to implement to reverse signs and symptoms in those early stages. And I will say, just because you are in a more advanced stage of diabetes doesn't mean that you can't see improvements. I'll share a story about that a little bit later. So we also want to talk about type 1 diabetes. So we always have called this juvenile diabetes or insulin-dependent diabetes. What I will say about this is that later research has shown in the last few years is that there are people who can have an autoimmune type reaction that causes type 1 diabetes to be diagnosed later in life. This has become very and I will say that it's for women, but we've also known of young men who've had the same challenge. But a lot of autoimmune issues tend to be more related to females because of our hormones, because of a lot of lifestyle factors. So autoimmune diseases are more common in females. But we have seen that type 1 diabetes that is diagnosed later, like in the late teens, early 20s, is more of an autoimmune reaction. So just because you weren't diagnosed as a child or as a baby with type 1 doesn't mean that you can't if you're still in your kind of early adult years. And then type 2 diabetes, of course, usually is non-insulin dependent. I don't like that we say that because a lot of times if you become what we used to call a quote unquote brittle diabetic, meaning that you just weren't responding to treatment. then you do become insulin dependent. So my husband has had diabetes since 2007, and he became very, poorly managed on his medication just simply because his body was no longer responding to the different types of medication. And so he is insulin dependent now. But he actually participated in some of the programs that the university offers for diabetes management. There's Livongo, and we've got LARC, and we've got a couple of other programs, Verta. He actually participated in the Verta program, and he was able to go from 6 insulin pens a day down to one, and he lost 40 pounds doing what's really kind of a coaching model on medical keto. So a diet and a lifestyle change that's very different than just your typical run-of-the-mill keto plan that you can do, like South Beach diet. It was very, very well done, managed by a doctor, a nurse practitioner, and a health coach. And so he saw great success, and he's maintained that success over the last 2 years. So it really does work. And he had tried everything before, and he wasn't seeing any results. And so if that's something that you're interested in, taking part in those additional programs that are offered as a UA benefit is really, really helpful. It can be for you and for your insurance dependents. So take a look at that. There's a page on the wellness site that will take you to all of those programs. There's also the fourth one is Hinge, which is more of a physical therapy component. But I believe that everyone should have some type of physical therapy evaluation once they're an adult, or once you've had an accident or injury or surgery. I think physical therapy can be really helpful. And so you've got two programs that can help with your diabetes. So Verta and Livongo, and then you've got LARC, which can help with hypertension. I actually participated in it because 4 years ago I was having hypertensive issues and had to be medicated for almost 4 years, and I found it to be helpful. They also send you a lot of free things, a lot of swag with these programs, an entire box full of bands that you can use for exercise, blood pressure cuff, weights to weigh your food. I mean, just kind of all sorts of nice little things to help you on your wellness journey. So I recommend any of those programs. I've also used Hinge for pelvic floor therapy, and it's been very helpful. And so all of that to say, when you're looking at these two diagnoses, we sometimes think that there's nothing that we can do to make improvements. And I really want to give you hope that there is. So I'm off all of my blood pressure medications, and my blood pressure is actually usually, unless I'm having a stressful day, a particularly stressful day, is actually in the optimal range for blood pressures now. And we've always been taught, and we've always told people in healthcare, especially in nursing and in medicine, that once you go on diabetes medications, you can never come off of them, or you can never lower your dose. Or once you go on high blood pressure medication, it's really hard to come off of those. You probably won't. You'll probably just switch prescriptions. And in both my husband and I, in both of these instances, were able to kind of go against what we thought would be the truth. For us, we were able to actually see a lot of really good improvements. My husband certainly did not reverse his diabetes, and he did all of this under the supervision of those medical providers along with his regular family doctor. It's really important that everyone is communicating so that you know how to adjust your medications, because while Verta was not writing the prescription for his insulin, our family doctor was. And so there had to be a lot of communication, because once my husband started losing weight pretty rapidly, he had to dramatically reduce his insulin. And so that's something you have to do with medical supervision. And it's really, really important that you have someone that can help you on your medical team that's local that can manage those things. Otherwise, you risk having a lot of hypoglycemic spells, which can be very dangerous. And my husband did have several of those throughout the program. His blood sugars eventually stabilized. And of course, it was worth working through those things. But it's just important to kind of understand the importance of how to manage that well. And then advanced diabetes can lead to insulin dependence, like I mentioned. And so my husband was able to stay off of insulin for a lot of years, over a decade. But that tends to be where you see insulin dependence occurring. So he's pretty textbook, which is why I'm using him as the example. I had prediabetes and I was able to reverse that with diet and lifestyle changes and losing weight, which is a lot easier said than done. So type 1 diabetes, this just kind of goes again, kind of in this comparison between the type 1 and type 2, which I'm sure many of you, if you're on the call, you understand this. And then, of course, gestational diabetes. So this will usually develop in the early stages, semester. Y'all can tell I live my life in a semester. In trimester 1 or 2, and that's when you get your glucose tolerance test. And so individuals who do have gestational diabetes are at risk for developing type 2 diabetes later, along with other cardiovascular and metabolic syndrome issues. If you do have gestational diabetes, there are some risk factors, of course, for the baby, and your OBGYN usually is really good about educating you on that. One of the kind of main things we see is that those babies tend to weigh over 9 pounds, which can make it a little bit more challenging to deliver a 9-pound baby versus what we typically see, a 7-pound baby. Those extra couple of pounds make a big difference. But just kind of knowing that and knowing how to monitor, usually if you can keep your blood sugar pretty well controlled, you can see that the babies don't gain as much weight. And there's other things that also can impact. So I had all of that education because I was pre-diabetic and failed 2 of my screenings with my second pregnancy, which was a set of twins. And so I was already being monitored for high risk. And so going through how that might impact the baby, of course. Early preterm labor and delivery is a risk factor with that. And there's some other health challenges that you can see with that, but they really do closely monitor you if you failed the test. Even if you don't get a gestational diabetes diagnosis, which I did not, they will monitor you really well and kind of walk you through that in your pregnancy. Usually you're given a health coach now. Just depending on your Blue Cross Blue Shield or other benefits, you might get a coach. There's a Baby Yourself program that I participated in for my third pregnancy. Again, a lot of nice swag. And I was assigned a nurse case manager. Her name was Diane, and she had such a positive impact on me. My babies, this last pregnancy that I'm talking about, was 12 years ago. And I still remember some of the highlights of my day when I was working long hours and going to school and taking care of 3 kids already. Was my nurse case manager, Diane, calling and checking on me. I didn't really need any of the information she was giving me, but having someone that was dedicated to calling and checking on me made a huge difference. So that was my first experience with health and life coaching. It was one of the reasons why I was inspired to go back and become a health and life coach. And that's the same kind of coaching that you can get with Livongo, with Verta, with Lark to a lesser degree, and then certainly with Hinge, you can opt into coaching or not. So don't kind of like negate or minimize the impact that having someone call and check on you can really do to lend support. It makes a huge difference sometimes in the way that we approach different things. It's also really nice to just have someone to chat with when you've had a long day and you've had a stressor. They can really kind of walk you through that. So metabolic syndrome, again, this is a cluster of conditions and symptoms that really increase your risk of heart disease, stroke, and type 2 diabetes. And it goes hand in hand with high blood pressure, high blood sugar, excess body fat around the waist, abnormally high cholesterol or triglycerides levels. And you can see risk factors are being overweight or obese, age, ethnicity, and heredity. So just think about genes, and then diabetes or other diseases like fatty liver disease. You can have non-alcoholic fatty liver disease, which is not uncommon at all. I actually had this diagnosis early on before my liver tumor and adrenal tumor was discovered. And after doing a lot of health and life style adjustments and changes over 4 years, I was able to reverse fatty liver disease, which never happens. You never hear about that. So I'm telling you all of these personal stories mostly because I want you to be inspired that when you go and look online for these success stories about I reversed fatty liver disease, or I no longer have a prediabetes diagnosis, or I no longer take, for 4 years I had to take hydrochlorothiazide. I no longer take that medication. Those stories are few and far between. People like my husband going from 6 insulin pens down to one and losing 40 pounds over 12 weeks. That's just not something you hear about. And so I do hope it inspires you that even if you've been on this journey for a while, or even if you're kind of trying to stave off some of these things happening in the future, there's so much that you can do to make it better. So polycystic ovarian syndrome is the PCOS, and then of course sleep apnea goes hand in hand as well. So metabolic syndrome, here's a graphic. It's again that visceral or that body fat, organ fat, that adipose tissue that's in the core, insulin resistance, hypertension, high cholesterol, low HDL but high cholesterol overall, and then that makes up metabolic syndrome. And so some things that you can do, we're getting to the sweet part, the sweet truth part. So having a commitment to a healthy lifestyle is so important. When we say that we want to achieve a goal, like we're going to be thinking about end of the year before we know it and the new year. And we think about resolutions, or even better yet, having healthy lifestyle goals. The thing is that several years ago, I'm going to use a silly example. I decided just arbitrarily that I wanted to read 100 books. And I had only been reading books that related to nursing or something I was studying in school, because I was in graduate school full time. I had young kids. So if I read a book, it was related to my work or school, or it was a child's book that I was reading to my kids. And so I used to love to read. I was an avid reader. I would read all the time, and I'm a fast reader. And so I would love to read books, and I wouldn't do it because I had so many other things on my plate. So this year where I was starting to lose weight and do, things to make myself feel better and just to focus on health, I decided to have a non-weight loss goal for the first time in my life and say, I'm going to read 100 books. Well, I got to the end of that year and I didn't read 100 books. I only read a handful of books, but I was tracking it on my Kindle, and I was reading a little bit of an inspirational blog to prepare for a class. And it said in there, and it totally was speaking to me, if you read 100 books, you read 100 books, fine. That's a great goal. But the goal really is not to read 100 books. The goal is to become a reader. So if you read one more book than you read last year, then you have really accomplished your goal, because the goal was not to read X number of books. The goal was to become a reader, and you are, because you did, right? So I went back and looked at my Kindle, and I saw that I had only read like 2 books on my Kindle the year before. Certainly, I read other books that were hard copies, but I was like, this is a good way to kind of track this. So the next year, I had a 100-book goal. I read a handful of books. The next year, I read more books. And then the next year, I read more books. And so when I looked back at that, I hadn't met the 100-book goal. Eventually, I did, and it felt good. But really, it was about who I was becoming by chasing that goal. That was really what that was all about. That's the same thing with healthy lifestyle choices. It's not about how much broccoli you can eat. Broccoli is not the end all be all. If you have diverticulitis or other health conditions, broccoli is not even healthy for you. You shouldn't even be eating that. And I know we don't say shoulds a lot, but you can't eat that. It actually makes you sick, those cruciferous vegetables. So it's not about saying that pizza's bad and broccoli's good. It's about saying that, pizza might be what I choose to have today, and I can make a healthy pizza choice. Or it might be that I say, I'm going to eat broccoli today, and I'm going to enjoy that that's a healthy choice for me, if that is a healthy choice for you. But it's not kind of labeling things as good or bad, and that's the end all be all, because that's not true. We're all individual and we all have different needs. And so the same thing holds true with these lifestyle goals that we make. It has to be a commitment to change what you're wanting to do with your life, what you're wanting to do with moving your body, with eating, with resting, with managing your stress, because you have to become that thing first before you can reach the goal. So if you want to be healthy and fit, you have to become a runner in your mind before you become a runner in reality. You have to become a person who eats healthy and makes healthy choices before you ever become the person who does those things, right? You have to think it first. And so getting 30 minutes of physical activity most days, then what you have to do is you have to decide, I'm a person that enjoys being physically active. And you have to tell yourself that because your brain's always listening and the brain wants to make you right because that's a way to protect you, right? I tell you all the time on these calls. Your brain's job is to keep you alive. It's not to keep you happy. And so it's always looking for reasons why you're right. And it's always looking for reasons why you should be concerned about safety and about, taking care of yourself. And, it's always looking out for danger. So it needs you to be on alert and to be aware. So the way that you kind of strategically take that on and make it work for you is to say, okay, I'm a runner. Now, you may have not run since you were in elementary school. I have not run much since elementary school. I don't consider myself a runner. I don't think running is a healthy choice for me. That's not a goal that I have. But if I wanted to be a runner, then I would say, yeah, when someone asks me what my hobby is, I'd say, I'm a runner. They're like, "Oh, okay," and they might ask me questions about it, and I would know enough to answer. And then by doing that, by putting on my shoes and lacing them up, by putting on my exercise equipment and my pack and having my water and my clothes, then I would create this identity of being a runner before I ever stepped foot outside to actually run. I do that with weightlifting. I love to weightlift. It's really helpful for me. It's easier on my body than cardio and some other more endurance type things. So strength training is something that I really enjoy. And so in my mind, I became a weightlifter before I ever actually set foot in a gym and did that. But then when I made the choice, I bought the things that would help me be safe and do it well. And then I got a trainer to train me on how to do that with proper form and technique so that I could make that a reality. So set up accountability for yourself in that way. You want to make sure that you're getting about 150 minutes of moderate exercise a week. So that means that you're slightly breathless, but you can still have a conversation. It might just be a little choppy. You want to eat plenty of fruits and vegetables, lean protein, and whole grains. New recommendations that are coming out. Again, there's always new recommendations. That's why it's so confusing. But to have around 21 different fruits and vegetables a week is something that's a good goal. A lot of naturopathic practitioners with a nutrition background are recommending that. I do not get 21 varieties a week, but I do get the number of servings a week that I need. But they're saying to eat 21 different varieties to get all of the good nutrients. So for every color of something that you eat, you're getting a different type of micronutrient, a different type of vitamin or mineral or antioxidant. And so eating a variety of fruits and vegetables, a variety of different colors is really helpful. Again, lean protein for most people is going to be helpful. I know that there are different reasons why you might not eat meat, but having protein is really helpful. So even if that's a plant source, you just have to be more strategic about that. And then whole grains. I don't think any of us want to go back to the food pyramid where we needed 9 to 11 whole grains a day. Some people don't really tolerate those well. So just make sure that you're doing what makes your body feel good, and paying attention to your body's red flags and your symptoms will tell you whether you like something or not. And you might be able to eat something in one season of life, but if you're having a lot of sensitivities and stress, you may in a different season of life not be able to eat that thing. It doesn't necessarily mean that you have an allergy, but you might have a sensitivity. And so I think recognizing what season of life you're in and tracking how you feel, how you look, how much energy you have gives you a lot of good feedback of if you're on the right path or not. Maintaining a healthy weight, honestly, I wouldn't think about the weight part. If you think about adding in more water that's filtered, if you think about adding in more fruits and vegetables and good protein sources and healthy fats, because your brain needs fats to function. If you think about those things, adding in more brain breaks, meditation, stress management, you're moving your body, connection, those sorts of things, if you're adding in the good stuff, it's going to crowd out the not so good stuff. And so weight loss will come as a natural result of the healthy choices that you're making, especially if you're doing things to really reduce inflammation, and to take care of your body. The weight loss will come. And for someone who has been on a diet most of their adult life, I have spent Since I was 11 years old, I have been on diets, and some were medically necessary. All of them were because I had been overweight for most of my life. That's a really challenging place to be, is focusing on the health and wellness aspect and not the weight loss. But wellness leads to weight loss. So, not smoking, not using other, illicit substances, tobacco, nicotine, the vape products and things, all of that can cause inflammatory processes that make it difficult to kind of manage blood pressure, blood sugar, your weight, all of that. So, early symptoms that you might be having diabetes are increased thirst, hunger, and frequent urination. We call them the three Ps. And then, of course, dry mouth, unexplained weight loss or weight gain, fatigue, blurred vision, and headaches. It just depends on if it's type 1 or type 2. And then these are some of the major complications, but I don't want to stay here long because you probably are aware of these. But again, you can have improvement in symptoms when you start doing some of the things we've mentioned about having healthy lifestyle choices. Of course, these are the cardiovascular risk factors. We've mentioned some of these. We didn't mention kidney disease or the issues with your eyes, but anything that requires blood flow can be impacted because when we have too much sugar in the body, the reason why water is so helpful, even if you're not doing other things that are healthy, it's that the blood gets too thick with the sugar, right? Think about honey, how thick that is. Well, when the sugar gets in the blood, it gets thick like that. So the more that you can dilute it by drinking water, and also by cutting out the sugar, then it lets your blood flow easier to where it needs to get, and your blood is taking oxygen to all of these organs. And so if the oxygen can't get there because your blood is thick with blood sugar, then you're not getting as much oxygen as you need. So that's why you're having clots and strokes and heart attacks and brain fog early on, and all of these other issues like kidney disease, retinopathy, cataracts, glaucoma to your eyes, high blood pressure, right? Because you're narrowing the vessel that's carrying the blood, and so the pressure's got to get higher to get the blood where it needs to go because the oxygen's got to get there. And so I don't know about you, but just having that visual makes me think about whether I want that extra serving of Halloween candy, right? Because I know that that's going into my bloodstream is going to make my blood thicker and I'm not going to feel good. Neurologically, of course, I've just kind of explained why this leads to nerve damage and organ damage. We're not going to sit here on all of the unfun parts because I think you know those, but it does cause pain and burning and tingling and numbness, kind of that nerve ending damage that you can have. Again, you can see improvements in this, maybe not complete reversals, but definitely you can have decreased pain. It can also cause overall pain. You can have a weakened immune system, so you kind of get everything that goes by. But the sweet truth is that you can change that. And so, really, as fun as a sprinkled confetti donut is, and I love one, right? And I still treat myself to those. Before I made lifestyle changes, one donut was never enough. Now, I would not say that I was a true binge eater, but I think we all have some tendencies sometimes when we use comfort food as kind of a stress management tool. And I did for many years. I ate my feelings because it felt like that was the only thing I can control. And once you start doing that, then you do get kind of a true dependence, or some people even a true addiction to sugar because it is highly addictive. And so what started out as a pretty tame, mild coping strategy to like eat that carb because you're going to have a real neurobiological chemical response. You're going to get some dopamine hits from having that carb. That's helpful when you're out of energy. Our bodies are designed to respond to that. But then when you accidentally use that as a coping mechanism and then maybe intentionally use it as a coping mechanism, over time your body kind of relies on it just like it does for caffeine. And so you're going to get to the point where if you can start to reduce some of those things, some of those sugars, some of those treats, some of those carbs, and add in good stuff, your taste buds will usually change in about 2 weeks. So after you come off the sugar high, for about 2 weeks, you're going to notice that you have cravings and that you have withdrawals like you do with caffeine. And then after 2 weeks, you'll go back to get that donut or you'll go back to get that Coke or whatever it is. And you'll realize that wow, that's way too sweet. So give it a little bit of time and let your body change in response to the good habits that you're doing. Every time you take a little bit of a bite of sugar, though, or a little bit more caffeine, or a little bit of anything that you're trying to taper off of, your body has to work hard again to kind of get back to where it was, right? It's like when you skip caffeine and you're like on day 2 or 3, you're almost to the point where you're not going to have a headache if you don't have caffeine, but then you just take a little sip and maybe another little sip, and then you have to start that process all over again. Same thing with sugar. And so obviously preventative things are always going to be better. So if you're never addicted to sugar, that's the best place to start. But changes really have to start with just baby steps. So if you're not drinking any water, you start drinking a glass of water. If you're only drinking a glass of water, you start drinking 2 glasses of water until you get up to your recommendation. Usually that's a minimum of 64 ounces of water, but usually not more than 128 ounces. It's generally about half of your body weight in ounces a day is the recommendation. Nourishing your body by eating a variety of foods, being more active. So if you're not doing any activity, right? If your activity is walking from your car to your office, then activity might be that you take a 5-minute walk after meals. So if you do have blood sugar fluctuations, one of the best things that you can do is take at least a 10-minute walk after your mealtime. So you might do it at your biggest meal of the day. And your biggest meal of the day, if you're diabetic, probably doesn't need to be dinner. Consult with your practitioner, with your nutritionist, but typically the biggest meal of the day needs to be breakfast or lunch so that your body has time to digest. Because think about, your body's trying to power down in the evening, and so if you eat your largest meal of the day, your body is having to kind of what we call shunt blood to your stomach to deal with that instead of getting you in kind of rest and digest mode for sleep. And so, a nutritionist told me, for me personally, reversing my meals and having my biggest meal in the morning, my medium meal at lunch, and my light kind of snacky meal at dinner would probably be the best for me. And then kind of going into that 8 to 10 to 12-hour fast at night that we kind of naturally do would probably be the best. That is when I started seeing the most changes in terms of weight loss and just feeling better overall. That doesn't work for everybody, but that was the particular plan for me. And that's the beauty of working with a coach or a registered dietitian, or some other healthcare provider that can give you a personalized plan. Because what we're doing here is we're just giving you general guidelines. So, taking care of your body, taking your medications as directed, making sure that you're talking to your healthcare provider. If you're adding any extra movement in, if you're adding any healthy changes, your healthcare provider who's prescribing your insulin or your medications need to know, because very small changes could impact your blood sugar in a dramatic way and could cause you to need more or less of your insulin or your blood pressure or blood sugar medication. Getting plenty of rest and sleep, avoiding those tobacco products and things like I mentioned, keeping your routine appointments, making sure that they know the adjustments that you're making, and then actually monitoring your blood sugar, your blood levels overall, and your blood pressure can be helpful. Managing your stress is easier said than done. Managing stress is kind of like trying to lose weight. I think stress management almost comes as a result of doing other things that you're taking care of your body. So for me, it's kind of the old adage of you can't organize clutter. It's hard to manage stress when you're not doing the wellness basics. So we have a class on that. You can go to the archive talks on wellness.ua.edu and see that 5 basics, which I've mentioned. It's you're nourishing your body, it's moving your body, it's hydrating, it's taking mindfulness and meditation breaks, um, it's sleeping well. Those are the 5 basics. If you're not doing those 5 basics well and your blood sugar's all over the place, that's going to be hard for you to manage your mood and your emotions, because when our blood sugars are going high and low, our mood kind of tracks that, because it's a red flag that we needed to pay attention to our body. And we ignore that a lot of times. My hand is raised. I ignore that. If we're used to ignoring our body's signals, like when we're hungry or when we're tired or when we need to go to the bathroom, and we just push through that, our body has to create bigger red flags to get our attention. So the more that we can really pay attention to our body, eat mindfully, rest, take breaks, listen to what our body is telling us through symptoms, then we can start to manage our stress better, right? So it's organizing our life and the important parts of it rather than trying to organize clutter, which you can't. It's the same thing with stress. If your life feels very chaotic, which mine has at times, I go through periods of that, right? We all do. That's the human experience. It's very hard to manage stress in that way, but you manage stress through by taking care of your body, taking care of the things that are going to impact it, um, and that part is self-care. We say self-care is not selfish, but part of self-care is not a bath bomb and a chocolate bar. It's actually creating a life that you don't need a vacation from or an escape from on a routine basis. So I hope that that's helpful. It's meditation, it's yoga, it's getting outside in nature, it's connecting to people. That's a huge part of having connections and good, healthy relationships. It's adding in the good stuff in more than you're subtracting. We all like to add more than we like to subtract, and so it's adding the good in and crowding out the not so good. It's drinking more water, it's moving your body, it's all those things. It's all the things we know to do, right? That we just don't make time for. And so focus on your health and wellness, not your diagnosis, whatever your diagnosis is. It's not just about managing your blood sugar or, all of the things that you think about. It's also all these other aspects that we've mentioned. And stress is a huge contributor to that. It's exercising and moving your body. It's not dieting, it's nourishing your body. So we're not dieting, we're actually eating healthy and nourishing our body. It's avoiding trans fats, which are those kind of human-made chemicals. So look at your health labels, your nutrition labels on your food. Usually, if you're avoiding nutrition labels, then you don't have to worry about the food that you're eating as long as you're trying to pick clean organic food. It's food that has a nutrition label that honestly you want to try to avoid as much as you can because it's probably been processed or altered in some way. Um, it's, using your monitors and your numbers. Knowing your numbers can help you improve where you are. So it's stepping on the scale and knowing what you really weigh. I didn't do that for years and years and years. And so I crept up until the over 250-pound range for someone who's 5'6". That was morbid obesity and in the type 3, like I mentioned. And I didn't know that for a really long time because I never stepped on the scale. And when I went to the doctor's office, I told him I didn't want to know the number. And so by not paying attention to that, I went from being a little overweight after my first and second pregnancy to morbidly obese after my third. And there were a lot of things going on at that, but if I had known that, I could have taken steps. I probably would have taken steps a little sooner. So know your numbers. It's just data, right? It's just data, and it's hard, but sometimes we have to kind of face the reality of our numbers to be able to make healthy changes. And I'm a proponent of health at every size. Actually, some of my numbers were actually better. My blood work numbers were better when I was overweight. And there's a lot of factors that go into play with that, but it's because my body is still trying to heal and repair itself from when I wasn't taking good care of myself. So, automatic weight loss, that does not automatically mean that you're going to be healthy and well and that everything's going to be perfect. It isn't. I promise. You still have symptoms, you still have blood work numbers that aren't the best. But we're works in progress, right? We're 100% human. Seek mental health care. It can be really, really helpful to get that kind of support. Anyone who has a chronic health condition that struggles with weight or anything like this that we've mentioned, having someone in your corner that can help you with the mental health aspect and the mindset aspect can be very, very beneficial. And then customizing your wellness plan to fit your goals and your needs and your body's needs. I can't stress that enough. There's not a one size fits all plan for wellness or weight loss or managing these chronic health conditions. But what you have to do is you kind of have to be your own experiment. You have to go and you have to say, okay, I'm going to try this thing. And if it were me starting over today on my health and wellness journey, what I would start with is good quality filtered water and drinking, the amount that I need to be hydrated. That's where I always recommend people start because it's where you have the most control. Food is a little harder for me personally to control, I think for most people. Sleep, there are so many factors that go into the quality sleep. It's not just about your hours, that's harder to control. But water and taking brain breaks, 5 to 15 minutes 3 times a day is probably the best recommendation. Those are the two things that you can control the most. And then movement, which is really hard to do when you're overweight or when you're having health problems. And so it's just adding 5 minutes. If you add in the 10-minute walk after meals, like I mentioned earlier, that dramatically reduces your blood sugar just by having an immediate walk after breakfast, lunch, or dinner. So start with your largest meal and take a 10-minute walk after that, right? That makes a huge difference in your blood sugar. You can track it and see for yourselves. You'll see a dip that you probably usually don't see. It's really, really cool. If that happens for you, let me know. I would love to know that. It happened for me and for my husband. And then create a group or a community that you can have added accountability and support. So these are the wellness basics that I mentioned, kind of our 5 to thrive, which I love. And then we're moving into the kind of the resources part. So I'm going to go through these quickly, but some nutrition. Again, this is sound nutrition that really helps anybody with any diagnosis or who just wants to be healthy. Making sure that you have a full fiber carbohydrate, so not a simple sugar carb, and then a healthy protein and a healthy fat at every snack and meal will really, really help you manage your blood sugar where you're not having the peaks and the valleys. Also, if you're gonna drink something like a Coke, I love Chick-fil-A Coke, y'all. If you're gonna have that, drink that with food or right after a workout because your body can then process that and use that better. So don't just have a random Coke in the middle of the day, but right after or right before a workout, and then when you're actually eating something, that will help your blood sugar stabilize better. And actually, your body can, if you're doing a lot of weight training, your body can actually use that sugar from the Coke. Doesn't mean to run out and go get a Coke if you weren't going to, but it can use that sugar to actually kind of refuel yourself. So it's kind of a little bit of a hack of, kind of tapering off those things. Healthy plates, like I mentioned, protein sources. So I've included all of this just so that you can go back and have a guide and a checklist, and I hope that's helpful. I always put a ton of information in these presentations because, again, when I was trying to figure out how to best approach my health and wellness journey, with my weight loss especially, I was so confused about what to do. Always pick the simple answer. The simple answer is usually going to be the most effective. Some healthy fats, some diet and exercise recommendations. So this is how you would actually kind of work to put a goal together for increasing your exercise. And we always do usually 2 pounds at a time or 10% of your body weight. I think 2 pounds is a little bit easier. So just losing 2 pounds in the next couple of weeks, that could be a goal if that's something that you're interested in. Of course, there's medication therapies, and they can really be beneficial in giving your body a break while you're trying to do things with diet and lifestyle to make a difference in your overall health. Stress management, again, I think when you take care of the wellness basics, some of the stress gets managed kind of naturally. But moving your body and meditation can help reduce stress levels. I will say though, I don't think you should use exercise. For most people, exercise just needs to be a non negotiable, not a stress management tool. Because you don't want to get to the point where you have to be stressed or angry or frustrated to get your workout in. You just want to make stress management be like the glass of water you drink. You want to make exercise be like the glass of water you drink. You just do it because you do it, right? That's just the habit or the discipline of doing something because it's a part of your routine. And then unplug, disconnect, and rest as often as you can. Of course, continue to monitor your blood sugar. There are recommendations about how often you should monitor. My husband at one point was monitoring up to 6 times a day because his blood sugar was so unstable. And so this is very, very specific to your own body, but at least a minimum of 1 to 2 times a day is usually the recommendation. And then there's a book here that's called Master Your Diabetes. And I think it gives a really good comprehensive integrative approach. Now, this is not, the end all be all. I don't think that you should ever 100% take in recommendations from a book and implement them in your life, but this may give you some ideas about how to manage your life. Certainly, medical supervision is also very important, and anything, like I mentioned earlier, that you do to change your health and lifestyle needs to be managed. Or you get into a situation where my husband bottomed out in the middle of the night, and the doctor on call said, "Do you have Lay's potato chips?" And we had just had a birthday party, so we did. We normally don't. He said, "I want you to go and eat as many Lay's potato chips out of that bag as you can. And since your wife's a nurse, I'm going to let her monitor you at home. But you're going to need to check your blood sugar." And he gave us a protocol. And so I actually have a picture of my husband leaning against our bed. We had a four-poster bed at the time. He's leaning against the bed in his dress clothes in the middle of the night because I told him, I said, "I'm about to take you to the ER eating Lay's potato chips." And so that's kind of our reminder of, don't take things too seriously. Definitely take low blood sugar seriously, but just know that you're going to have bumps along the way. And it's just a matter of how you bounce back and are resilient with those. I think everyone's life is harder than we let on. And so just know that you're not alone in that. We would love for you to follow us on all the social media. Carolyn and Sierra and Miranda are Wellness Work Life, and they do an amazing job with everything behind the scenes to make these classes and programs and things work for you guys. So I hope you'll take advantage. And I'm going to pop this open so I can see the chat and see if y'all have any questions. Good, Mary. I'm so glad. Feel free to share all these stories, and you can share this when it goes live as a YouTube video. He can speed up the recording and make it really, really fast, and he can watch the video if he's willing to do that. My husband would not do that, but yours might. Sharonda, the slides will be popped in the chat. So if you go up a couple of comments right above Mary's, you can download those and print them. They're a PDF. Yes, and definitely take advantage of the wellness screenings. So you can get your blood sugar, your BMI, your waist circumference, your weight, your blood sugar. What else did I name? You can get all of that plus free coaching.